Hey, I just did the initial run of customer staging on the new POC environment, and it got all the way down to trying to pull the code in.
Wow.
So that was
10% of the time, Chef works every time.
I didn't think it would get all the way through, like installing the database and everything, or the initial database. It did. So I got a few things to hammer out, but that was good news.
I would just like to point out that I beat Scarbeck to the meeting. Sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
Maybe it's just going to be the three of us doing a fire drill. Awesome.
Well, that's not as fun as I want this meeting to be.
I think others are joining. I'll give them a minute.
Yeah, everyone's always 2 minutes late to this thing.
And I know, but I knew you were running this one and you were going to start it right on time. So I was trying to be on time.
I knew it wouldn't start on time, so.
I've even got the issue and the doc open already. I haven't read them yet, but that's a different thing.
Well, sir, you're really up there today.
That's because I didn't.
We obviously have not had enough incidents for you to take care of.
No. It's that the CI incident this morning took away all my motivation for other things. I'm like, DNA starting in 5 minutes. I'm not squeezing anything else in.
All right, so since we have at least a few people here, I'll go ahead and get started. So as noted in, well, first off, announcements, Thanos is ready. Enjoy, have fun. Okay, so agenda, fire drill, let's do it. So there's a Google Doc linked into the issue. So if y'all want to open up that issue, we could all gather notes and type together. We are on scenario number 6, so scroll all the way down to the very, very bottom. So this one's a fun one because we're like in the middle of trying to improve this process. So in the meantime, let's try to poke holes in our current process, tell us where we can improve. Let's rock it out, man. So the maximum number of pods has been reached for Git HTTPS. So before we investigate how to increase the capacity of said service, let's figure out how we know that we have hit the maximum of the said service. Who wants to lead the way? Dave, I think you should lead the way since you are so prepared for this.
I wouldn't call myself prepared, but I am going to go blindly jump into dashboards.
Let's blindly jump together, sir.
So I'm not. So let's see here. I don't even have the right things bookmarked anymore. So here we go. We're going to search truly. Let's go with Git kube deployment detail. I don't even know if I'm going at the right dashboard.
That's the point of this exercise, man.
So looks like we got some CPU graphs, memory graphs, and network graphs, but no saturation and stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is not too helpful. So what other Git dashboards do I have? Here's my containers dashboard. Deployment CPU, memory. Those are my container CPUs.
I guess I should point out that you are looking at some of the same like type of information in this particular dashboard. You're seeing the web service container, the workhorse container, and the GitLab shell deployments all stuffed into this dashboard.
Yeah. So I'm not seeing much so far. So let's go to pod info. Did I already go to that?
Not yet.
Oh, that doesn't look good.
Oh, I know the secret to this one. Yeah.
Gotta pick the actual cluster rather than the regional cluster, rather than the regional cluster, the actual particular zone. So we've got interesting active replica set things, but still that's not going to tell me that I can't provision any more pods.
Although if it was if it was a flat line, it would be a clue. If it was a
it would be interesting to see if there were flat lines in anywhere. That would be, you are right. For our joiners, we are starting to walk through the Firedrill, and I got volunteered to start blindly looking through dashboards to answer the question of, if we had hit this saturation point, what would we see? It's interesting. I would note that this quota seems to be blank, and that would be a potentially useful thing.
Well, I'll give you a hint. No, it's not.
Okay.
What that particular table is supposed to show is the CPU specific quota resources.
Okay.
So for each pod, there'll be a listing of, hey, this pod is at 50% of its CPU resource allocation, for example.
No, but to go to Craig's comment, if this was flatlining, I assume the active replica said if it looked like it was hitting a ceiling rather than dipping up and down like this, that would be a potential clue, I would guess.
Okay,
And
so
the potential active replica
so far,
set. I'm not saying that's an indicator.
You are on the right track. Active replica set is currently the only thing we have in our dashboards that say this is the count of pods that are currently running in this environment. In this particular case, you're concentrating your efforts on US East 1B, so only one of our 3 clusters, which is not the best desired state, but this does give you our pod counts.
Yeah. And as Craig noted, like thank you, Craig, like I would agree. Like if I was seeing a flatline ceiling here, then that is an indication of like, something's not right.
So, our current count, we are obviously missing a piece of information on this dashboard. So why don't we try to find out what the maximum configured count is? That way we have some number to look at.
All right. I'm going to put on my like really dumb manager hat and say like, I know I should be looking at the GKE stuff in the GitLab on ops for our config there. I see Craig Barrett raising his hand. So maybe you want to
well,
share
I can either
screen
share or if you want to, I would suggest maybe searching for HPA in the dashboards. And maybe there's something useful there.
Do we have an HPA dashboard?
Let's find out.
That's shiny.
Oh,
I didn't know this existed.
Yes, that's like 2 in a row, man. 2 fire drills in a row.
So this
I've gotten something like that.
looks like we do have an HPA dashboard, and then I would want to highlight on either GitLab shell or depending on what
Websockets
other things.
2 above it. Oh, sorry, it's Canary's 2 above it.
Canary Web Service Git.
Yeah, right now I'm on GitLab shell, but we'd want to filter on the right service here. Where I thought GitLab shell would be one of them.
No, right where you were, down about 5 or 6 from where you were. GitLab gets down more, a couple more.
Web Service dash Git. Yep.
That's the one.
Yeah, so we'd want to highlight that guy, and if this again was ceilinged in the 90 to 100% range, that would probably not be good.
Indeed.
But thank you, Craig Barrett, for pointing that out. Then the other question I think you were looking for, Scarba, because we could also look at in configuration in the GitLab deployments.
Yep.
Config and find the actual HPA config there. That I do not know off the top of my head. I'm going to go ahead and reveal that. I'd be fumbling around pretty thoroughly to try to find that.
The HPA config combined with the active is that saturation graph there. So I mean that saturation graph is that's the key.
The graph is the indicator, but I just meant like if we were also looking for the raw config of that where it exists in the YAML files, I know it's somewhere out there in the GitLab deployments.
I do find it fascinating. I didn't know we had this dashboard. That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Bookmarking the hell out of that one.
Ask stupid questions, win fun prizes.
Yes, you get to take Saturday off. And
And
maybe
Friday,
you know
if
what?
you like.
Fridays are Family and Friends Day. So yeah, go ahead and don't take that one on too. Okay, cool. Thanks, Scarbeck. I was just going to my notes. Like we should note that dashboard. Awesome.
So we have a saturation dashboard for our HPA. That's excellent. So in this scenario, let's just assume we've hit the maximum number. Let's say we've hit the number of a value of 100%. I have two questions regarding that. If a 100% saturation, if we are 100% saturation, this is a very easy question, but kind of dumb. What technically does that mean? Like, are we saturated across all clusters or saturated across one cluster?
I would think that would be one cluster. Like you'd have to check each zonal cluster independently. I didn't notice on that dashboard if it was, that dashboard is not broken down by cluster.
It's an aggregated metric, so it's
Right.
probably the max. From what I know of all their other saturation, it's probably the max that it's seen across the instances of things, and there is an instance of the HPA per cluster. So yeah, it's probably the worst one.
So it could actually be, that could be a misleading metric if it's aggregated. So if the other two clusters are healthy and you've got like one zonal cluster that's just completely blown out of the water, your saturation numbers could still be semi-okay. Am I understanding that right?
Depends on, well, at the moment, yes. So I'm just thinking at the second we're talking about producing zonal scikit clusters, where one of them being saturated would actually be a problem. But that's sort of independent. Don't get too distracted. Right now, yeah, we might be okay if the other ones are, as long as the load distribution is okay, because our load distribution with the through HA proxy is random across the zones.
I'm going to say if your load distribution is equitable and working like it should, and one of your clusters is at 100%, the other ones are going to be very close, if not at 100% also. Now, that's not to say there aren't corner cases where that could not be the case, but that's ideally, I think if it's not, then the problem isn't necessarily the running out of space. It's why are we either accumulating traffic in one zone or routing traffic to favor one over the others? Or
one zone is doing more work for some reason. Yeah, either way, yeah, you're right. It's
like returning 500s is easier, so you can get through a lot more traffic.
Oh, so the ones that aren't saturated are the problem then, yeah.
So as part, let's continue the exercise. Where would we go to? Dave shied away from doing this, but where do we want to go to if we want to bump up our maximum allowed pods?
I might have found it. While you guys were talking. Would go to Kate's workloads. I was starting to look through. I was looking at just the gprod YAML, and I found GitLab web service, HPA replicas min 2, min replicas 30, max replicas 150. That's where I'm thinking, but I'm actually going to stop myself there and say, like, I usually would be wearing the IMOX hat, not the EOC's hat. So I'm going to take that hat off and like try to transfer it.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
That is the right space, though. I think that's exactly the right spot for changing it.
That's precisely where we are. So Craig, Misko, I don't know if you want to share your screen just so we could do a quick overview as to what values are actually configured, because as Dave quickly showed, we see a lot of values repeated a few times. So I think it might be worth just discussing at least.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to try to hand off to somebody who might be wearing the engineer on calls spot.
So what Craig is showing is that we've got our HPA configuration for each of these. So the min replicas is obviously the minimum number of replicas that we want to be running. And the max is the maximum number of pods we want to run. It's important to note that what you see for these values is per cluster. So from a technical standpoint, we run 3 clusters, so we max out at whatever 150 times 3 is. I'm not doing the math in my head. Minimally, we'll be running 90 pods. So if we want to change this, we need to be aware of a couple of things. One is that this is going to take place across all clusters, and then we also need to make sure we have enough resources available to us. We have right above this, you see where we set our resource limits and requests. It would be wise to make sure that the node capacity that we're using for this particular for this workload is sufficient to hold the amount of pods that we need to run. So Craig, I don't know if you kind of want to delve into this, but if you want to pull up our Terraform repo, we could then look at what kind of nodes we're running, what size they are, and guesstimate how many pods that we should be able to achieve on these nodes if you'd like to.
Sure. Now, just want to clarify though, that's web service. So that's actually, that one there is actually the
You're looking at the one
Websockets.
specific to WebSockets, yeah.
Where's the HTTP one?
GitLab shell is right there.
But that's GitLab. That GitLab shell runs, and we run the web service in that deployment.
No, so GitLab shell is only the SSH front end to our application.
Yeah. So I can't actually find. I mean, we can go find the thing, but if we want to look for actual numbers, I can't find the HTTPS Git. The web service. No.
Check out either the I don't know what file you have open.
So this is releases GitLab, values gprod. Oh, it's a default. Yeah, that's a service.
Just do a search for web service only. Or excuse me, Git. Because it's going to be under the web services deployment.
Web service Git. There we go. Default.
Yeah, so you see WebSockets, Git, and at some point in the future, API will shortly be added to this list.
Cool. But this is in the top level values, so it applies to all deployments by default. We don't actually have a gprod specific thing for that. So in Canary we do, but it's just some environment variables. So where is this actually getting any?
It should be in gprd.yaml.go temple.
Yeah, I think that. There is no
WebSockets.
Git.
Interesting.
So without any specific replicas, you'd get.
Is there a global fallback configured somewhere?
Well, that's in values. Values.yaml.go temporary, and that's got all of this, which is fine, but none of that specifies an HPA unless it.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. Is there anything like at a, well, no, I guess it wouldn't be at a level.
At the level of the web service and not the specific deployment, perhaps?
Possibly. Oh, right, it wouldn't hear it. Yes, you're right, because that would. Oh, right, so it's, yeah, it'll be
3150? No, that's registry.
Yeah, yes, no, that there applies to all deployments of this web service.
Right.
So we're getting 30 and 150 of WebSockets and 30 to 150 of HTTPS Git. Okay, cool.
So just to point out though, if you go into the WebSockets, you see the min replicas is set to 6.
Overrides it.
You must have it, yeah, it overrides it. And I think you have an old branch because that should be set to 2 at this point.
And also, if you were to change that, that would change the replica settings for all web services, not just Git.
You'd need to break out a separate section and put in specific limitations if you just wanted to grow just the Git component, or in the future, like the API.
So in this specific example, we would probably very much want to do that, because otherwise we could be affecting all sorts of other things unexpectedly, especially once we get API and other things going here.
I don't know, it's just the maximum. It's not like it's going to automatically create all those pods.
True. Unless they've been very carefully limited. Yeah. So in Terraform, we have, I'm assuming in the variables for gprod, GKE, get HTTPS. We are running on custom 16 2480s, which are 16 CPU then? Yeah, 16 CPU and 20 gigs of RAM. But I don't know how many of them we have. It's just a machine type. Where do we define node count for GKE? But node count, that's for individual nodes. This is a good question. This is zonal. So,
Is it an auto scaling group, or is it statically defined?
we do, don't we?
So
there we go. Max node count of 50. Whew.
I was going to be kind of worried if we had limited this to a hard count.
If
I mean, it's limited, but like it's not iterated as individual nodes.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, our node pools, our module defaults to having a max node count of 10, I recall. So you'll see for this one, we upped that to 50.
So we have 15, up to 50 nodes per zone. And each of those has 20 gigs of RAM. 20 gigs? Gigs. Sorry. Yes, gigs. So it's 1,000 gigs of RAM per zone. And we allow 4 gigs per machine. Sorry, no, that's WebSockets.
Well, we request one. Yeah, that is also WebSockets.
So we don't have a request. Oh, default level for web service is no idea. Not from this. We'd have to go look at the actual deployed configuration. I mean, it should be in here somewhere, right?
It's got to be somewhere in there.
All right, I was note taking. What are we looking for?
We're looking for the limit, the resource requests and limits, but for the Git. And there's no, it's only the environment and then the next one up. But we don't seem to have any. I mean, what we can do is we can go look at the actual deployed configuration.
These are not hard requirements, as I understand it. Like, you don't have to define them. It's best practice to define them, but it's completely possible they're not there.
Well, we do, as before, do we have a top level setting for web services? There's a general default.
I think he was looking for that by
in values.yaml.
Yeah, that's where I am. So web services, this is the web service.
I mean, YAML files are so easy to read.
Yeah, right.
So this is the definition for Git specifically, which just says absolutely nothing about that. And there's no top level requests that I can see. That's for workhorse. It's a different beast entirely.
Line 821.
Oh my goodness, all the way down there.
It's a massive block, yeah. It doesn't help that the network policy is in the middle of all that.
Right. Excellent. Sorry, let me find it again. There we go. Right. So a maximum of 6 gigs. And we have 1,000 gigs of RAM per. So sorry, that's the max.
So the request is 5 gig.
All right. So we've got 5. So we can have 200 pods per zone. Sorry, 200. Pods. Things
Per host.
So no, per zone. So we've got 1,000 gigs of RAM, and we've got 5 gigs for each one of those. So we can have 200, and our limit is currently 150. So we can bump that up to 200. Probably 200, and it'll be satisfied.
But you've also got other services competing for the same resources on those hosts.
Not
right.
Exactly. No. John?
Well, we may have 20 gigs of RAM per node, but the allocatable RAM will be slightly less than that. But the amount of that is minimal. I think it's just maybe 1 gig at most. I'd have to.
But what I was
dial
getting
from
at is we would
head.
have deployments for Websockets, for API, for CAS, all of those pull from the same resource pool, right?
So let's look at, to answer your question, let's look at how we do this. So there's a value where we set the type of server that we want it to run on.
Okay. Taints and
so not necessarily
affinities?
taints. It's just more like we look for, it's a node selector.
Okay.
So in this particular case, I'm looking at Sidekick just because I have it on my screen. So we have a value called node selector. We look for a key of type, and we look for a value called Sidekick in this particular case. And we should see
Node
that
pools.
somewhere in here for our web services as well. Here we go. So for the Git services, we look for a node selector of type equal Git.
We have node pools that are service specific.
Precisely.
Okay.
Which is, not the most efficient way of running Kubernetes at the moment, but in order to minimize the amount of change that we're introducing as we migrate things over, we're just creating new node pools to avoid the noisy neighbor effect of our own workloads. I want to revisit that in the future, but that's a future task I'm trying to get rid of. I'm trying to finish up an OKR before I get to that process.
So as a Kubernetes noob, I'm disappointed that even VMware could tell you if you were over provisioned. I guess what is this like? You just get all the parts, and if it breaks, you get to keep both pieces. That's not a very it means that you can make a change and then you can end up completely over provisioned without any insight into that provisioning from your config, which is a concern for mitigating outages and other problems.
That's true. That's very accurate. How does VMware tell you that you are over provisioned?
It tries to quantify that stuff into a common measurement between your available resources and what you're going to run, and compares them and says, hey, it looks like you're going to be over. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not, but breaking things down into these common, like for VMware is very simple. It would break it down to memory and CPU and compare them. And it sounds like we're doing this all by hand.
Well, and I thought, the other thing would be is that it's been a while since I interacted with vCenter and vSphere, but I thought there were warnings on API interactions, and particularly in the UI, anytime you did stuff in the UI, but let's not talk about the Kubernetes UI for now, but an API interaction would throw a warning back at you and say, you're over provisioned, or you could configure the API to do so. That's what I thought VMware had for that kind of stuff.
I see a market opportunity for a tool to look at.
I thought there already was one. Didn't you recommend? Somebody commented in the last 2 months with a UI for Kubernetes. Was it you, Craig? Somebody did.
Yeah, that's no different than the console though. Lens.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was Lens. Okay, that's what. Yeah, because that name reminds me. But
And it's
so, but
more
it wouldn't have given
for,
you that.
yeah, it's basically, that's more like a GUI alternative to kubectl.
But it so it'd show you your architecture, but it still wouldn't show you if you were over provisioned.
Yeah,
But
it
see, it
has
wouldn't be
no
hard to add
intelligence
on
or,
top of that, though.
yeah, I mean, but manifest files are just files on disk, right? So like you could have
True.
any arbitrary number of manifest files scattered throughout a directory, and that doesn't necessarily reflect actual workloads that are currently running in a cluster.
Well, you think you could compare what the current config is to what the current provisioned
And
nodes are.
that's something more in the realm of Helm, because Helm does make some attempt to render its values
Okay.
files and do right. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Scarbeck, but like Helm tries to do a pre and post and like generates a diff of current state versus new state. And so Helm would be best positioned to maybe try to start teasing out that intelligence.
Yeah, to expand a little bit further, prior to us performing a deployment, we run a diff and we validate that the changes that we expect to occur show up inside of that diff as part of our merge review procedure. For auto deploys, we have this little checky thing that says, hey, give me all the diffs. And if we find a configuration change that was not meant to be there, we bail the auto deployment just to make sure that we're not mixing a deploy with an auto deployment. To go into the details of what Cameron is trying to get towards, you are correct, Craig, and that Helm would probably be the best position to start trying to determine whether or not we may potentially over provision ourselves. The problem, though, is that Helm does not know what servers are backing these services. So it doesn't know that it's got 20 gigs of RAM available on a specific node pool. It just knows I've got a configuration file that says I'm allowed to have 1 gig for 30 pods. It sounds like Dave said, we probably need some sort of tool that probably is able to coalesce all that information together. So maybe this would be a great improvement to the services thing that we've created. Do we still use that? I know we use it for creating dashboards and alerts, but I don't know if we still have our UI in front of it. But anyways,
For our
the
service catalog.
Yeah.
That could be interesting. I think it would be it would be an interesting challenge keeping it connected to the manifests in the active Kubernetes cluster.
Both the manifests and Terraform, yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't kubeadmin has access to all this information? It has access to the current config, the previous configs. It has access to all the nodes and what's available on them.
Yeah,
Kube
all the pieces are there.
Yeah, kube control will tell you when things are wrong. Like we have the event log, and if a pod is unable to be scheduled, we get the reason. And it could be that a node is out of a specific resource. And it'll tell you that we've got 30 nodes available. We can't match any because, say, CPU is out of CPU availability, rather. So kube control, the event log coming out of Kubernetes would be beneficial to look at in those particular cases. But hopefully we don't run into that after it's already happened. I think the ultimate goal here would be we set up the necessary alerts so we know that we're saturated beforehand. So we know how to tackle that prior to it becoming a problem. But unlike VMware, we are doing that by ourselves, leveraging Prometheus in this case.
As long as we know we're doing it and we have an idea on how to perform it, it's not that bad, but it is possible to make mistakes. So having like even a robot second set of eyes help guide it is sometimes beneficial, but
Yeah, accidentally fat finger and add a 0 in one of your limit your requests and whatnot, and not catch it and run through a pipeline and kablooey.
Why are we requesting 100 gigabytes for this one pod? I don't understand. We blew through that fire drill relatively quickly, so I think for the remainder time, I think we should just ask questions and just keep whatever conversation we want going. I don't have anything else that I want to cover specifically right now.
Should we, for the purposes of focus and brevity, should we cut the recording? I don't know if we wanted to keep it like highly topic purpose specific or just let it go. Just saying.
I'm okay with, I don't have the capability, but I don't, if Dave, if you have the ability to stop the recording, if we stop this particular conversation, I'm okay with that.
Let me try. I'm not sure because it's part of the. Looks like
Yeah,
I
there's no
can.
buttons.
Looks like I can, but why did we want to stop the recording? Just because
I don't know. I just like
Oh.
if we were gonna put this on YouTube as this is the fire drill video, this would be the end of it, or no.
Yeah, well no, so I could stop recording and then restart it so it like has separate things so we could catch the fire drill.
Yeah, it's just something that occurred to me, or we can keep going.
Sure. I'll stop and restart it because yeah, then the fire drill is separately recorded. That makes sense.